The Persona series has arguably usurped Dragon Quest's and Final Fantasy's crown as the premier Japanese RPG franchise by combining classic turn-based combat with relationships and mechanics and infusing it with enough style to brute force itself into the mainstream. But Persona was not always what you see today, and using a guide to Japanese role-playing games, you're going to see how Atlus turned this into one of the most beloved JRPG series. Before Shin Megami Tensei, there was Digital Devil Story Megami Tensei, released in 1987 by Atlus on the Famicom. The game was a first-person dungeon crawler where you recruit demons to join you. In 1987, eat your heart out, Pokemon! Atlus released a direct sequel, Megami Tensei 2, in 1990, which starts out with a bang, a nuclear one. According to a guide to Japanese RPGs, this is the entry that the Megami Tensei franchise really found its voice, with a focus on post-apocalyptic Tokyo as well as moral quandaries. Shin Megami Tensei was released in 1992, Shin meaning real, and as the name would imply, this is intended to be sort of a side story to the previous entries, which explores the world and events that would have led up to the apocalyptic events from the first two games. In 1994, Atlus released Shin Megami Tensei If, a side story to that explores what would have happened if Tokyo hadn't been destroyed. This is a super important point in the SMT series because this created the branching timeline in which the Persona series would eventually take root. So it took us a minute to get here, but to recap, Tokyo was destroyed and demons took over, but then we recruited demons to fight those demons, which started the events of the Shin Megami Tensei series. But what if that didn't happen? Well, then the Persona series started happening. Make sense? Good. Persona 1 was released in 1996 and combines the ideas developed in SMT If and the premise of the Breakfast Club if everyone's inner demons were literal, then leveraged those demons to save the world. The game is still pretty rough, and while it does feature a bit of character development, it's not enough that I felt particularly attached to any of them. Persona 2 Innocent Sin and Eternal Punishment were a duology that released following the events of Persona 1 and drops that first-person dungeon crawling mechanic altogether, instead allowing for exploration from a third-person view more in line with other Persona titles. The duology both featured far better character development, which would be further leveraged in future Persona titles. Persona 3 was released on the PlayStation 2 in 2006 and is the first Persona title that most fans of modern Persona titles would easily recognize. This is the revolutionary entry where the Persona series started to find its own real voice. It ended random encounters and introduced social links but removed demon recruitment mechanics. As it says in a guide to Japanese role-playing games, as often happens with innovative products, Persona 3 suffers from questionable design choices. But the concept was just so fresh, and the look so stylistic, and the combat so slick, that it proved to be immensely popular worldwide. Persona 4 could quickly be described as Persona 3, but far further refined in almost every way. Atlus really cleaned up a lot of those rougher edges, and despite the murder mystery vibes, it somehow brightened up the atmosphere, which had been pretty dour since even the earliest Megami Tensei titles. Persona 4 was far more of an evolutionary iteration building upon the great ideas from Persona 3 without establishing too many of its own. This brings us back to Persona 5, which can be seen as Atlus taking everything that worked from Persona 3 and 4 and combining it with some of that original Shin Megami Tensei flair. Demon recruitment makes a return to the series, for instance, but Atlus breathes some fresh new ideas to life in Persona 5 by embracing a stealth and exploration mechanic to the game's various dungeons, and leaning heavily into the avant-garde user interface that ties thematically into the rest of the game. You can learn more about the evolution of the Persona and Shin Megami Tensei series by checking out A Guide to Japanese Role-Playing Games from Bitmap Books. It covers these and hundreds of other titles in far more detail. It's like a reference book of JRPG knowledge. Check it out by following the link in this video's description.